everybody, I'm Crystal, and this is our review of the Meizu Pro 6. If the first thing you think of when looking at this phone is anything other than, wow, that looks like an iPhone, then you are crazy. Well, just like any other Meizu phone, the design has obviously been heavily inspired by Apple. But before you blow this off as just another cheap iPhone ripoff, stick around to hear what this phone is actually capable of, because surprisingly, it's really good and it has some creative ideas of its own. And even though we've seen this design before, it still looks and feels very nice. The Pro 6 has a unibody aluminum design, and the metal here feels very high quality. There's no sharp corners anywhere with the phone, as the sides curve to meet the back, and the front of the phone also has slight curves on the sides where the display ends to meet the edges of the phone. It feels really nice. We have some antenna bands with a unique design at the top and bottom of the back with an ever so slightly HTC 10S camera lens. And underneath this is a funky 10 LED flash. Power and volume buttons are on the right with your speaker, headphone jack, and charging ports at the bottom. And yes, this is the most familiar design feature of the phone, but there's nothing to complain about here. It's a beautiful build that also feels incredible in the hand with its aluminum finish and unibody design. As we push that power button, we're greeted with a very nice 5.2-inch Super AMOLED display. It's a 1080p screen, and with this screen size, we're looking at a PPI of 423, which is great. And no, it's not the highest resolution, but it doesn't have that flicker effect on the eyes while moving the phone at quick speeds. And the whites are really great on here. Even when putting the phone down to its lowest brightness settings, a lot of AMOLED displays start to get very warm and pinkish here, but the Meizu Pro 6 performs very well, delivering true whites no matter where the brightness is set. With this being AMOLED, black areas of the screen are a true black, which makes other colored areas of the display appear to pop a little more. It gives you a lot more depth. There's also a lot of display features here too, built right into the software, like eye protection. Blue light supposedly can be harmful to your eyes, especially when trying to sleep, so tinting the screen to a more orange hue can be done here. You can also change color temperature as well, which is similar but a lot more subtle. And lastly, display modes to increase or decrease the saturation of colors. I was really impressed with the display here, and even though you can make out the pixels while being up close, the 423 PPI is still more than enough, and it's very energy efficient. But we're not quite done here with the display, or the iPhone comparisons for that matter, because the Meizu Pro 6 has 3D touch. Yes, actual 3D touch. What I'm doing here isn't a long press. The Meizu Pro 6's display is pressure sensitive, and this is a first for an Android device. They call it Force Touch here, although it has multiple layers and works just like what we've seen on the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus. In fact, all the uses for this feature are ones that we've seen before, but they're actually very helpful. They're mostly used for shortcuts, like on the home screen. A long press will rearrange icons, like what we've seen for years, but a force press will display different shortcuts like video mode or selfie mode for the camera. You can also customize the amount of pressure needed in settings. We also have peek and pop gestures, just like on iOS, where a touch with a decent amount of pressure will give you a preview of an image, and as you add pressure, the preview will get larger and larger until it pops to full size. The problem is, pretty much all Android apps are not able to support this force press just yet, so you'll be stuck to using this feature on Meizu's home screen or their own apps like Gallery or Mail, etc. And that's probably going to be it for a while until Google incorporates this new functionality into their software. On the bottom of the display, you'll find a single home button, and just like the Pro 5, this button doubles as a fingerprint scanner. And the speed at which this scanner performs really shocked me. It's one of the fastest, if not the fastest, fingerprint scanner I've used on an Android phone. You do have to push the button first to turn on the display before the scanner begins to read, but once the screen is on, your finger only needs to tap the scanner for a brief moment and the phone will unlock. Now, it's not too fast where a press of the home button will send you past your notification screen, but if the screen is already on and your finger makes contact, it'll unlock instantly. Now, you'll notice that the Pro 6's display is on, yet there are no on-screen navigation buttons, and there's no capacitive navigation buttons either. So where's the back button and multitasking button? Well, the back button is actually built into the home button. A simple tap will trigger a back command. It'll definitely take some time getting used to, but one button doing it all is a pretty cool idea and is very easy to get used to it. As for the recent apps button, it's not as practical, but it's still quite unique. Sliding from the bottom of the screen and up will bring up your recent apps with a very cool animation. As you slide up, the app you're on will slowly shrink as your other recent apps come into frame. It's actually very clever, and the animation here just makes sense. It can be kind of annoying trying to actually trigger this, however going slowly will always work, but that can get frustrating if you're someone who's constantly switching apps. The speaker sits at the bottom, which makes it very easy to cover up, and the sound will always be facing away from you when watching videos. But once again, this was another area where the Meizu Pro 6 really shocked me. This is one of the best sounding bottom facing speakers on an Android smartphone. It gets very loud and delivers very nice bass, and it's very clear while not being tinny. It just sounds really great. Under the hood, we have a pretty powerful processor and GPU combo along with 4 gigs of RAM. You have 2 storage sizes at 32 gigs or 64 gigs, and unfortunately there's no microSD card slot. Throwing the phone through some benchmarks gave me some interesting results, with Geekbench giving the phone a really high score in the 6000s, which is very impressive. However, with Antutu, it didn't quite reach 100K, but still overall very promising results. As for real-world usage, the phone performs very well. It never really slowed up. Launching and switching between apps is very snappy, and gaming is great too. Although gaming isn't the smoothest experience, it's still very much playable. The Meizu Pro 6 packs a pretty small 2,560 mAh battery, which is even smaller than last generation's, but you can actually still get some pretty decent battery life out of this thing thanks to the lower res screen and the energy efficient processor. I was able to get about 3 hours and 45 minutes of screen on time on average with moderate use. For me, that's just enough to get me through an entire day, but once in a while I did have to charge an hour before I call it a day. But when you do have to charge, USB Type-C is there, which is very convenient with its reversibility. But just like all Meizu phones, we have something that will split a lot of Android users, and that's its software skin called Flyme OS. In the past, I really didn't like it, but this year there have been many improvements that make it easier to get used to. There still isn't an app drawer, so you'll have to resort to making lots of folders, but you can easily install a third-party launcher like Nova or Google Now. The pull-down menu is not divided into 2 sections anymore, which is great to hear, and your shortcuts and notifications are all displayed in the same place, and if you need to access more shortcuts, just simply pull down again. There's finally a settings icon in the top right, like all Android phones, something that was missing on previous versions of Flyme OS, and Flyme OS brings some cool features too, like a gesture menu within settings that's loaded with different gesture inputs like double tap to wake, notification pull down, and 8-letter gestures that can trigger a launch of any app you decide. It's definitely a very heavily skinned version of Android that lots of users will have to get used to, but just because it's different doesn't mean that it's bad, and the changes that Meizu has made are actually pretty clever. So now let's move on to the camera, which is a large 21 megapixel sensor with laser autofocus, the 10 LED dual tone flash, and no optical image stabilization. Photos are kind of a mixed bag. With that 21 megapixels, you can really zoom and crop in a good amount, but pictures don't appear very sharp, and then you begin to lose details. It's also a pretty noisy camera, even in well-lit conditions, and often leans towards the warmer side of things. In some areas, colors are very lacking, almost looking like some type of filter was applied, but other times, while in bright outdoors, you can really get some decent shots, but that lack of color is still very noticeable. In high dynamic range situations, the Pro 6 will struggle, but when HDR is turned on, it helps, but then it helps almost too much, giving a very unrealistic look. In low light, you can see the usual weakness mid-range smartphone cameras have. You lose more detail, colors are even less colorful, and they're pretty dark and noisy. Here, HDR can be pretty hit or miss, sometimes brightening the photo just enough, but sometimes brightening the shot way too much, bringing out details in the shadows, but at the same time blowing out the details in the highlights. And that crazy looking 10 LED dual tone flash sounds awesome, but it's not much different than any other dual tone flash you'll find on a smartphone. It's probably there just for looks. The 5 megapixel selfie cam has a larger pixel size than most in order to capture more light, but selfies are a little below average. In bright outdoors, you get a decent shot, although it's quite soft with some noise, but if you're in anything other than bright light, your selfie shots will come out very blurry or with lots of distracting noise. You can shoot up to 4K with the Meizu Pro 6, and it looks pretty decent, but at the same time shaky with the lack of optical image stabilization, and it does struggle to focus sometimes when moving. So in the end, I was really impressed with this phone. Yeah, coming in I wasn't expecting much because I knew the Meizu Pro 6 was going to try to implement features that we've already seen before, and I knew it was going to be running a heavily skinned version of Android, but I wasn't expecting these familiar features to be implemented so well, and the tweaks that Meizu has made to their skin actually have a creative purpose. Sure, it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but it's a very well thought out phone in every area. But what do you guys think? I really want to hear your thoughts on this phone, so please in the comments below, let me know what you think of the Meizu Pro 6. Thank you very much for watching as always. You can follow us on our social media links listed down below. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like because that really helps us out. Make sure you head on over to AndroidAuthority.com for the full in-depth review, and subscribe and stay subscribed because we are your source for all things Android.